Ah yes, the cabin in the woods. That age-old horror trope where terrible things happen in the dead of night in an isolated forest where no one can hear you scream. But those are all just stories, right? Hi, I'm Connor, or since I'm dressed up for Halloween, you can call me the Doctor. And today I'm counting down the top 10 cabins in the woods that you should never enter. Number 10. Skeleton Lake. Starting off our list, we have a story from Reddit about an abandoned cabin on the edges of Skeleton Lake in Ontario. The poster describes the odd situation he put himself in. He'd been coming to the lake for the past 23 years and the cabin had been abandoned as long as he could remember. And he had explored it on more than one occasion, but this time was different. He brought his camera. He had become enamored with abandoned buildings and thought that the spooky cabin would make good material. Boy, was he right. He managed to snap this picture while looking inside the cabin. What do you see there? It looks like some dark figure standing in the doorway, and commenters discuss how it can't be steam or other air particles since it seems to be casting a shadow. So maybe our explorer managed to catch some sort of dark entity on camera. Number 9. Roaring Fork. The Roaring Fork Trail is a 5.5-mile long loop in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, adorned with mills, historic buildings, and cabins. But even though many are abandoned, there is always one resident in the park. Lucy. The first sighting of Lucy was in 1910 when a man named Foster was headed back to his cabin and came across a woman in the middle of the trail who needed a ride. Naturally, he took her where she needed to go on his horse and noted that she had a fiery personality and felt very warm for it being such a cold night. He found himself falling head over heels for her as they talked through the night, and the next day he went to find her again. But when he went to the cabin where he dropped her off, only her parents were there, and explained that Lucy had died in a cabin fire 1 year earlier, and they'd rebuilt on the same plot of land. To this day, visitors report seeing a woman on the side of the road with no shoes looking for a ride. Number 8. Playing tricks. Another story from a Reddit user describes their experience of moving into a rental property, a cabin, near the edge of a river in Ohio. They say that from the moment the couple moved in, they had a strange feeling of being watched, like they were not alone. The wife would be woken up in the middle of the night to her hair being gently tugged or her feet tickled, and it only got worse from there. She even began to refuse to be alone in the house. Once, a toy car rolled down the hallway despite them not having any children or owning any sweet Hot Wheels, and the dog ran through the house on his own like playing with someone. But the final straw came when they had a few friends over for dinner and suddenly the wife felt herself get smacked in the forehead, and everyone else in the room heard it. So they called the landlord and asked him to come over so they could tell him what had been happening. He told the couple that 7 years ago his young son Matthew had drowned in the river, and that he loved to play tricks on people. So perhaps that's what was happening. He shouted out that if Matthew was in the house, that he needed to stop playing tricks on this nice family, and from then on, no one was touched. But strange things did continue to happen until the couple moved out, and it's gone uninhabited ever since. Number 7. The Portraits. One night in Colorado, a hunter got kind of lost. It had begun to snow and he couldn't catch his bearings to get back to his truck. He walked for what seemed like ages and came across a cabin. Thinking that he could ask the owners for help, he knocked on the door, but to his surprise, the door swung open. No one was inside, and he thought that he would just wait out the storm and explain it to the owners in the morning. As he laid on the bed, he looked around the sparsely decorated room and noticed that there was almost nothing in the room, other than a bed and a stove and some tools, but on all of the walls were picture frames, hung evenly across the entire place. Inside each was a portrait of a face, very realistically painted. He thought the owner must be an artist, but there were no art supplies to be seen. As he laid in the bed, he felt like all of the painted eyes were looking right at him, but he brushed it off as a trick of the light. But when he awoke in the morning, the sunlight beaming into the cabin, he looked around and realized there wasn't a single picture frame on the walls, only windows. Number 6. Cameron Lake. My family has a cabin in British Columbia, but next time I decide to go further and visit Vancouver Island, I'll make sure to steer clear of Cameron Lake. The cabins here seem to be haunted by multiple presences, including Grandpa Bonnie, who fills the room he died in with pipe smoke to let you know he's there. Some residents have seen what they called a 3-footed monkey at the end of their driveway from time to time, and the ghosts of 4 passengers who died in a small plane crash haunt the lake, as their bodies weren't found until 15 years later. Number 5. Foster Cabin. Situated in the middle of the log cabin village in Fort Worth, Texas, this cabin was once and still may be the home of a man named Harry Foster. These cabins were built in the 1800s, and Harry and his wife were excited to begin their lives together. But Harry had a drinking problem and a temper, and one night while she was in the bathroom, spritzing on her favorite perfume, which smelled like lilacs, he inexplicably beat her to death. After that, he married the nanny, who later died of suspicious circumstances. People who have visited the cabin since report that they heard footsteps in the empty attic and the smell of lilacs wafting through the air. Number 4. The Bonesetter. Just west of Camilla, Ontario in 1895, newspapers reported a real-life horror story that went down in an abandoned cabin. Dr. Robert Frame was a well-respected physician and bonesetter, and so was his son. Both doctors and the rest of the Frame family lived in the cabin on Lot 16 until the early 1890s when they abandoned the place for greener pastures. Literally. The cabin was rented out multiple times in the following years, but no one stayed for long, claiming that they heard strange and disturbing noises coming from the attic at night. There was a group of woodcutters who stayed there while on the job, and they always heard a series of 3 knocks in different parts of the house, every night getting louder, even hearing them on the front door, which then swung open on its own. After that, they heard phantom footsteps upstairs and the knocking way more often. The police came to investigate, and what they found was shocking. Laid out neatly or stored in specimen jars were human bones and pieces from amputations. No one is sure whose they were, but it seems that one of the doctors had a secret collection, and that is where people claim the knocking was coming from. Restless spirits whose bones were put on display and then left to collect dust. Number 3. Camp Scott. June 1977, Mays County, Oklahoma. A Girl Scout troop was so excited for their first summer camping experience as they made their way out to Camp Scott. 3 of them, Lori, Doris, and Michelle, got checked in at the main cabin and after a day of fun headed out to their tent, but unfortunately they would never see the morning. A counselor found them when the sun came up and they had been strangled and left for dead. A truly horrifying scene. But even more chilling is the fact that the same counselor had found a strange note in their cabin that 3 campers would be murdered, but they did nothing about it. People who have visited the now abandoned camp have seen messages scrawled on the cabin walls asking why no one helped and hearing blood-curdling screams in the night. Number 2. Cabin 28. On April 11th, 1981, 2 intruders broke into Cabin 28 at the Keddy Resort, where a family had been staying, and they tortured and killed 4 people in a particularly gruesome fashion. They restrained John Sharp, Sue Sharp, and Dana Wingate, and proceeded to beat and stab them all multiple times. Sue was discovered with a stab wound so deep that it cut through her spinal cord. Dana had been strangled, and John died from blunt force trauma to the head. One more victim, Tina Sharp, had been abducted, and was not to be found until 3 years later when her head was discovered at the base of a waterfall nearby. The murder weapons were found at the scene, and one of the knives had been used with such force that it actually bent sideways. This grisly crime has still not been solved to this day, but in the years following, many people have broken into the cabin to see if they can feel the spirits of those who died there, and they got more than they bargained for. Chairs moved and even floated. Threatening messages appeared scratched into the walls only to disappear moments later, and screams are heard nightly. Number 1. The Bell Witch Cabin. The Bell Witch incident is one of the most well-known hauntings in the United States, and it's frequently cited as the only known incident of a ghost legally being responsible for the death of a person. John Bell Sr. In 1804, John and his wife Lucy had just moved to the area of Red River and were creating a lovely little homestead with a successful farm. One night, John saw a strange creature with the head of a rabbit and the body of a dog in the cornrows. He tried to shoot at it a few times, but it ran away and he thought nothing more of it. Later that night, as the family was at dinner, they began to hear knocking at the door. When Lucy answered, there was no one there. The knocking came again. Louder, but now from the windows. This continued all night, but there was never anyone outside the house. Over time, things began to fall over. They would hear footsteps or voices like an old woman singing hymns. They felt a strange presence and sometimes were touched by something invisible. When their daughter got engaged, the witch didn't care for her betrothed and systematically ruined their relationship by violently messing with the pair until they broke it off. The voice would scream nightly that one day it would kill John and continued to harass the family. Other townsfolk got wind of all this and came to witness the happenings, and they all attested that it was a real haunting. The witch would savagely beat John with invisible hands daily and make his tongue swell up so badly that he couldn't breathe. And one morning, Lucy found John dead, with a bottle of mysterious liquid on the floor, which she claims the witch used to poison him. Visiting the area now is not a good idea. There are plenty of reports of violent happenings that are attributed to the witch, so stay away from this cabin at all costs. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Remember to like and subscribe. I'm Connor, stay amazing, and I'll see you next time.